All right, welcome back. Kathy, good morning. How are you?
Good. How about you, Al? Thanks for having me.
Of course. No, I'm extraordinarily excited to see you. We've had some great discussions recently on ethics and inclusion analytics through the People Intelligence Alliance. But today we're talking about a topic that's very exciting to me because this is going back to my personal background. And the article that you wrote and the research that you've done on organizational design is really something that needs to be heard broadly because that's actually, I'm going to pause there. How about we introduce you and a little bit about the research and the work that you've done around org design?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Al. So, Kathi Enderes, I'm the Senior Vice President of Research at the Josh Bersin Company. And the Josh Bersin Company, you probably all know Josh. I joined Josh and the team a couple of years ago, 1.5 years ago, after working at the Bersin by Deloitte Group, leading research there on talent and workforce. And before that, I have a background in management consulting for about 10 years, and then 10 years in industry as a talent and organizational development and effectiveness leader. So I have both the practitioner background as well as the consulting background on this area. So when we started studying this topic of organization design about a year ago, I was very, very excited to see what we find. And so now this is the result of many, many different conversations, interviews, a big survey that we did to really demystify this like big topic of how you design your organization for success.
Well, before we get into some of the slides and research that you have produced, I just want to ask a broader question because
Please.
organization design has been kind of an esoteric topic over the years. It's been something that has been viewed as a nice to have or within the domain of HR, but the pace of change is such as that, hey, I don't have time to be designing things. I have to do work. So, what was the impetus for going after this specific theme?
Yeah, what we found out actually that in the pandemic, because things were changing so rapidly and so like just the pace of change has accelerated in all sorts of areas, organizations have had to just bring new services, new products to the market. Of course, they had to design touchless services. Like different offerings, online offerings like never before. Every company had to transform their delivery mechanisms. If you think about any industry, really, whether that's retail or whether that's healthcare or whether that's financial services, they had to rapidly redesign their offerings, but then also rapidly redesign where and how people work themselves. So the whole hybrid work, remote work, of course, had to be accelerated. I remember a couple of years ago, actually in 2020, I presented at your conference, Al, at PAFOW, and I talked about hybrid work a lot. And then little did we know that a couple of months later, actually, the remote work, and little did we know, a couple of months later, we would all be put into the um, remote work like frame
Yeah,
of reference overnight, right? So every
right.
company we talked with, of course, had to do remote working, and what that means is you had to people were just doing different jobs like rapidly basically, and you didn't have any time to think about, can we bring a big consulting company in that helps us redesign work? You just had to do work differently overnight. So um, organizations have been asking us a lot, actually, can you help us with organization design? And what we meant by organization design was not just organization hierarchy design, but work design itself. How do we work differently? What skills do we need? What capabilities do we need? Who works with whom? Who connects with whom? How do we engage? All of those topics for us fell under organization design. So I think that was the impetus for us to study this topic in a more practical way, not in a theoretical way.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing this. And yeah, I want to ask this, and I have, some results, like I said, that I want to pop up. But what you just shared prompts one more question before we do that. Uh, who did you talk to? Like who is responsible for org design? Is it HR? Is it IT? Is it operations? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, we talked with a lot of different people. We talked, of course, with HR because that's our primary audience. We also talked with business leaders because in reality, the pace of change required every business leader, honestly, to transform their operations and their organization literally overnight. IT, of course, is a big part of that too, because the tools and technologies that you use to support people's work, of course, come in there. If you think about, for example, all these online offerings, you can't do that without IT or without technology as well. So in a way, it can't be just an HR effort. It has to be driven by HR because they look after the people side of things. But of course, operations, IT, finance, all of these groups actually have to come into the org design discussion.
Absolutely love that. And I want to come back to the notion of governance and the ongoing accountability and how this work is done at speed, at scale, over time in a sustainable way. But before we do that, I want to highlight the article that you wrote that got me all fired up. And you have a video out there that speaks to this as well, which I think is fantastic. So congratulations on doing that. But I just want to scroll down and highlight this. And I'm actually going to show everyone the link. And Jenna, if you don't mind making sure that it's distributed out there, you can find this on Kathy's profile on LinkedIn. But here's the link as well. If I scroll down here, I want to get to that first graphic. And if you want to speak to this, Kathy, over to you.
Yeah, so the way that we think about org design, before I go into the specific numbers, is not just organization structure design, but we think about org design really broadly. We think about business model design. So literally, what's our business model? What business are we in? Who are our customers? Operating model design, which includes, of course, how do we go to market? How do we bring, what kind of offering do we have? How do we optimize for customer success and customer performance and customer delight? We think about work design. What is the actual work of people and teams that needs to be accomplished to support this operating model? We think about job design, which is how do we put all these work activities into jobs. And then we think about organization structure design. And then we also think about implementation and adoption and governance and methodology. So we think about all of those components. And what we identified in this chart, what we show in this chart here is that it's a really, really mysterious topic. It's probably the most mysterious topic in HR because what you see in green here, those companies, when we did a big study on this, a big survey on this, those companies, the percentage of companies who does that very well or well, basically. So work design is the least understood topic, but it's also the most important topic, by the way. So work design, 21% do this fairly well. 44% say we're really not good at this at all. And even if you think about org structure design, which is usually the thing that most companies think about when you think about organization design, still more than half of companies actually are not good at this at all. So lots and lots of mystery around this topic.
Yeah, this, frankly, when I read the article, this is what I literally got chills and I got all fired up because we talk about workforce planning, we talk about talent acquisition, we talk about job descriptions, we talk about skills, all this stuff. And it invites the question, are we accurately defining the work in the first place? And not only are we doing it in the current time, are we projecting forward? So we're hiring for the future as well as the current state.
Yeah.
I say no, 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 and this validates that. And so I would love to see organizations, leaders, not only executives, but I'm talking, operational leaders, to get better at understanding the work. And that's going to help everything downstream, from planning to hiring to learning and development to, identifying key talent and so forth. So I certainly celebrate this. So I hope this is a key takeaway for everyone. By the way, I didn't say this at the outset. If you all are listening in and have questions, whether you be on LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube or elsewhere, type your questions into the chat and we can bring them and pose them to Kathy as we go.
Yeah,
I'm
great.
just checking over here and making sure that we don't have questions.
Oh, let me expand on what you just said, because I have a great story for this particular point that you just made. We talked with a lot of different business leaders in our big reset discussions. These are weekly discussions with about 400 companies where we talk about these topics like org design or talent acquisition or learning and development, topical as the environment is shaping up. So basically they talk about the great resignation and all those kind of things, how hard it is to hire anybody. And one person, he's actually leading organization design and workforce planning and people analytics in a very large bank who you all know. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but he said to us, this is such an important topic for us because what happens for us right now, managers overhire. Every manager can decide what they want to hire for. They overhire. So for example, in the people analytics space, people think they need a data scientist when they really need somebody who does data cleanup 90% of the time and maybe 10% of data scientist work. So they hire these high-powered data scientists, very talented people, and they come in and they think this is this great job where they're going to do all this higher power work. But then they do data cleanup all day long. And what happens then, of course, people turn around and like, wow, this job really sucks, right? I didn't want to come here to do data cleanup all day long.
Yeah.
And of course, they leave again because managers think at some point they'll need the data scientist, but really for the next 2 years, they're probably going to need the data cleanup people. And that happens everywhere in the operation, not just in people analytics, of course. It happens everywhere in the operation, usually when you don't design the work itself.
Amen. It is a great example, and that's a great improvement opportunity. And I hope that is recognized as such. It's not a criticism; it's just an opportunity, particularly as we move through time and we have these perpetual disruptions, both externally and internally. That's going to change the nature of the work. And even with people analytics, there's so many tools that can facilitate data cleanup. So if somebody comes in, if they have those tools in place, then they can work on the more advanced stuff. If those tools aren't in place, then they're going to have to do that manually, and that's not work that a PhD wants to be doing. So your point's really well taken. So I brought this up. Kathi, you want to speak to this?
Yeah, of course. And I touched on this a little bit. So org design, of course, is not a new discipline at all. It's been around for probably hundreds of years. And when we talk with many companies, they still use the STAR model, which of course is a good model, but it was invented in the 70s. And if you think about the 70s, of course, what didn't we have in the 70s? We didn't have the internet, we didn't have big data, we didn't have mobile phones. So 70s is really, really a long time ago. So we thought it was really time for a new model and a new approach that is more a business-driven model and a business-driven approach. So that's kind of in a nutshell what this is. This is business-driven organization design, not starting with the structure, but doing the structure last, right? So you're going to think first, what business are we even in? Even if you don't change that. And of course, even sometimes when you don't do org design for the entire company, you just design the operating model or the org design for a function or for a part of the team. Even your people analytics team, for example, you still need to think about what business are we even in? Who are our customers? How do we operate? How do our customers get their products, their services? And then you can think about how do you design the work of your particular team around that. So always thinking about the business model first, the operating model first, even if you don't change it. In that context, leadership culture, all of those kind of requirements are in the business model design as well. Talent strategy, of course, is part of that too. How do you orient around customers? What roles do we need to get customer success, and how do we govern? How do we have metrics around that? And then you go to the work design, and work design is really, really important and really, really misunderstood, as we just saw. And then you think about what's our job architecture and how do we plan for our workforce? So the strategic workforce planning concept that you mentioned, Al, goes in there. And then actually, how do we make these jobs really flexible? Because we all know what happens with your job architecture, right? When you post a job and when you have a job, by the time you have posted it and somebody goes in there, it's kind of obsolete already. So how do you make sure that these job designs are flexible and really aligned around the work itself and not just like these rigid structures?
Well, let's talk about that for a second as we go back and forth like that. Is the frequency in which that process happens. And if I might, with our time that's limited today, ask about who is involved in all this? We mentioned it earlier,
Yeah.
but what does it look like in, say, a leading practice company, or what would you hope it looks like in the near future? And let me stage the question a little bit more. If IT is a key stakeholder and influencer, HR is, operations is, you might have facilities, you might have a variety of others, even legal.
Yes.
At what frequency do they meet, and what information are they consuming to make wise decisions around job design and org design?
Yeah, I mean, the point about information and frequency is really, really important, because it used to be that you do org design as a project like once every couple of years when your organization gets out of whack, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
when you're like, oh my God, what we're doing actually are the jobs that we have more jobs than people. Right? Do we have more job descriptions than people? That sometimes happens. So we have the work is not reflected in these job descriptions at all, or something is broken.
mhm,
We can't recruit talent. We can't hold on to talent. Some of these things happen, and then you do like a big project around org design. You do it behind closed doors and behind the curtain, and
exactly.
the consultant works with the leadership team, and then you do the big reveal and you tell employees, here's your new manager, here's your new role, here's your new job. And of course that doesn't work all that well, because people said, well, you don't even understand my work, right? So one of the big ahas that we had here, and we had many big ahas, but one of the big ahas we had here is involving employees themselves in the organization design process. And only about 10% of companies even do that, which is one of the lowest adopted processes. So bringing employee voice in the work design itself, it sounds obvious, because obviously, like as a leader, you don't understand really to the level of detail that you have to the work of the people that you design for. So you got to bring people's voice in. It sounds very obvious. So the kind of data you need to bring in is, of course, listening to employees, involving employees, doing design thinking around the work itself as well. So all of those requirements come in there. And I love that you brought up the maturity model, Al, because we're actually talking about that now. Most companies are in the lower levels of maturity, and the way these maturity models go, we always have these 4-level maturity models. Level 1 are these that are least effective and have the least good outcomes. Also, when we say outcomes, we don't just mean employee engagement or people outcomes, but then also business outcomes like financial performance and customer satisfaction, and innovation outcomes, change agility, all of those kind of outcomes. We mean all of those outcomes. So most companies are actually in the lower 2 levels of maturity. And let me just talk a little bit about these maturity levels. So usually a company starts out with chaos, and we call that haphazard structure. And you see that about 1 in 4 companies are at this level. For them, organization design is a complete mystery. Every manager hires their own people, and they just basically come into, like, they say, well, I want the example that I just made of this big bank that said people just overhire, right? And then usually finance comes around and puts a lid on it, right? Finance said, you can't overhire anymore. I'll put a lid on it. You can't go above this cost. And then there's kind of no design around it at all. So we call that haphazard structure. And then companies move to the second level, which level 2 is always interesting. It's always the level that we see that companies think they're already there. So those are, but then there's 2 more levels to go. So the level 2 organization design, with 1 in 3 companies at this level, as you see here with these numbers, they think about a company as a well-oiled machine. When something is broken, you just fix the machine, right? But
hmm
and that might have worked in more the traditional, maybe like supply chain, thinking about basically before we were in a knowledge and service economy. That worked probably really well, but we're not there anymore at all, right? Every employee has so much knowledge, so many insights that we don't have at management or leadership levels, that we have to tap into them as well. So the big aha at this level is how you operate matters more than how you organize. So you need to understand how the work itself happens, and the relationships and the connections of the people, not just the reporting structures. One example I have of that level, how you can move to the next level there. Bank of America, for example, they use a tool called WorkView, which helps them understand how work actually happens on a really granular level. And then they also add to that organizational network analysis as well, because in addition to decomposing the work itself, they also want to see who works with whom. So they add to the org view insights, which is more on tasks and work processes, the organizational network analysis. So I thought that might be interesting for you because we have those kind
Because
of
I'm a
things.
geek. Yes, absolutely it is. And it's a great story. And I'm smiling for a reason, because this is a narrative that's long overdue. And the fact that
Yeah.
you put research to it, I think is fantastic. And I hope the listeners and viewers are finding it inspiring. So with this in mind, and I know we got one more thing to talk about, I want to talk about who is going to facilitate the journey in this maturity model. And yes, the executives are ultimately responsible, namely the CEO. That being said, the role of people analytics, and in the interest of time, I'm going to project a little bit here. I
Please.
see HR and people analytics specifically being a facilitator of this process and enabling it. Would you agree with that? And if not, who is?
Oh, absolutely. I think HR has to be in the middle of that, and people analytics, strategic workforce planning done well has to be at this, like absolutely at the center of this as well. Because without data about your company, but then also about the market overall, like outside data on what jobs are going to be evolving more so, more getting more important or less important, and helping inform the work and the roles and the jobs with all of that data, you're kind of out of luck, right? You're just shooting in the dark, and without the compass,
I
without
hug you for saying that.
it's true, right? And you know that I'm a mathematician, so of course I like data and I like insights. But without data, you can't really. You have to be led by data, and then of course add your insights to it. So people analytics and strategic workforce planning, talent intelligence data about skills and capabilities that you have both internally, but then also in the market itself, and bringing in kind of a data culture, a data first approach, I think is really, really key. And that we see that in the level 4 companies, which we call agile and accountable.
Well, these agile and accountable companies, I mean, the value proposition is clear, and I'll bring up our final slide here. Do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, of course. So the journey to this agile and accountable, and we call it agile and accountable because both agility and accountability are actually really, really key. You can read more about it in my article. But agile and accountable organizations actually are much, much more successful in all sorts of ways. So the journey is not easy, but it really pays off. They'll be almost 4 times more likely to delight your customers, 27 times more likely to engage and retain employees. And as you see here, 30 times more likely to adapt well to change. And of course, change is everywhere and it's coming to us faster and faster. So it really, really pays off. It's not an easy thing to do, of course, too, because you need both data, you need business insights, you need to bring together all these business aligned teams with cross-functional teams with all the constituents that you mentioned, Al, but it's really, really important to do this and to do it well.
Well, yeah, I love that there's not that it's needed, although I will argue with myself that it is needed, that there needs to be a selling of this notion, because in my view, it's obvious, but I have to respect that not everyone has that vantage point that I have over the course of my career that's developed my lens. And you and I have grown up with data and analytics. And this is probably the last thing I want to talk about. And it's something that I've been struggling with and I'm learning a lot about. I listened to a podcast. Brene Brown interviewed Amishi Shah. I'm also listening to and reading Think Again by Adam Grant. And what I want to highlight that's mentioned in both of those interview and book is if we bring the insight, it just doesn't mean the world's going to change in line with what the data and insights are telling us. That there is the recognition that we do have some legacy mindsets, for lack of a better term, some unthinking to do, think again, Adam Grant. And so coaching organizations to take the next step, what are some of your recommendations, or based on the organizations that have gone to agile and accountable, what do you see that they have done in common to get to this agile and accountable organization?
Yeah, I think the leadership, like it or not, leadership is of course key, right? If the leader doesn't want to turn their organization around into a more agile and accountable organization, they're just not going to do it. So there's different ways you can do it. I'll mention a couple of different ways that some of the organizations we talked with and we highlight in our study did this. So one example is Telstra, the big telecommunications company in Australia, very large telecom. So telecom is usually like more an old-fashioned industry in most cases. And we talked with Alex Badenoch, who is their CHRO, and she told us they literally changed it overnight. So they did the big, like, rip off the Band-Aid and change everything around to agile teams, agile, like cross-functional teams that come together around customer problems. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is what we heard from Bosch Power Tools, who are a very large German manufacturer of like tools, drilling things and all of that. They started actually in their business operation. They didn't start with tech. Some companies start with tech because tech is easier to do agile, of course, right? Agile methodology and all of that. But they started with their business operation, and they did that because they found that they lost market share because they didn't address customers' problems. So they told us when they started with their business teams to have people actually assign around customer problems, they told us, it's a great quote, I would like to quote it, it changed us from a company that produces power drills to a company that solves drilling problems. And that's the kind of mindset that you really need to have, not selling widgets that you have and nobody needs, but how can you solve the drilling problems in different ways? So starting either big or small, whatever works best for your company, both of them work. And I think both of them decided what worked best for their company and who was ready for that change. And then you either scale up or you just rip off the Band-Aid and do it overnight.
Well, absolutely love it. Yeah, anyway, I don't want to overly bias my impression of what you're advocating. I just am excited for the world to take this step because it's Amishi Jha, who Peak Mind, fantastic. I'm just a massive fan of who she is and the work that she does. She talks about effectively meta consciousness, meta awareness. And I think there's a role for organizations to be meta aware. And what is the bigger picture, and how can we design for that as opposed to staying so locked into what has been the case historically? And so with that, I want to ask this one last question, if we can answer it quickly. You answered it a bit, but not going backwards. How can organizations prevent not going, backwards to the same old, same old? What would you advocate?
Yeah, I mean, I love the call out to change management because that was one of the things that we identified it was really, really key too. I think one of the changes that they made from level 3 to level 4 is put employees at the center. So bring the employees into the organization design themselves as well. So for example, I mentioned Bosch Power Tools. They actually let every frontline manufacturing employee decide which kind of team they want to be on. So they tell them, you tell us how to organize. Should you organize around regions, around geographies, about customer segments? And they let employees actually design these teams themselves. So I think the big aha for me was bring the employee in the middle of that. It can't be just a top-down process. It has to be a bottom-up, employee-driven process with, of course, leadership support. So leadership support is really key. But bringing employees at the center of it and designing with employees, not for them, is I think where it's at.
Well, Kathi, we got to wrap. You're awesome. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for doing what you do. How can people learn more about you and what you're up to there at the Josh Bersin Company?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk about this topic. I could talk about this forever. We could probably do 2 more podcasts or 3 more on this. So.
I didn't
Yeah,
pick up on that at all.
yeah, let's do that. So yeah, just find me on LinkedIn. You have my profile in there, and love to connect.
All right, Kathy.
Yeah,
Thanks again. You be well, and hope to see you in person very soon. All right. Be
sounds
well.
good. Thank you,
All right.
Al.
And thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Well,
See
thanks
you
for your
soon.
questions too.
Of